Welcome to the 3DownNation podcast. I'm Justin Dunk, joined by John Hodge and JC Abbott. Fellas, a full slate of CFL preseason action. And I got to say, at least the Saskatchewan-Winnipeg game had a number of intriguing storylines and a great finish. What were your takeaways from the first real full weekend of CFL action, Hodge?
Well, I thought that the CFL Plus streams were great. Credit where credit's due. The CFL's had technical problems in the past. I thought the CFL Plus streams were awesome. I enjoyed hearing the local radio commentary on those broadcasts. Ironically, the worst broadcast of the week was the TSN broadcast between Toronto and Hamilton, because that game appeared to be played in the eye of a hurricane. Like, oh my God, there's bad weather games, and then there's torrentially bad weather games. That was my biggest takeaway, but it felt good to get the football back on the big screen, to watch it, to enjoy it. I had multiple screens going at times. And, I thought, especially like the Winnipeg Saskatchewan game, which I know we'll talk about in a bit, we actually saw best on best for like a decent amount of time, which you don't always get in the preseason. So I enjoyed it. I thought for like relative to most preseason football, most of what I watched was pretty good. It's not as good as regular season, but all in all, I enjoyed it.
I don't know how TSN is going to be able to afford to maintain the CFL rights going forward if they can't even afford a cloth. Like, come on, wipe the camera down, guys. There are points in that game where you just couldn't see anything, and they were showing the shot as if you could. It was a bizarre viewing experience. Admittedly, I was only able to watch about a quarter and a half because I was in attendance at the BC Lions preseason game in Langford, British Columbia, just outside of Victoria, which was a tremendous atmosphere. Just over 6,000 fans in attendance on the island, in a very intimate little venue there at Starlight Stadium. It's always a lot of fun when the Lions can get out to the island and expose their product to a group of fans that don't always get to see it live. The energy was up for what was essentially just the Lions backups and scrubs, a lot of guys who aren't going to make the final roster, but you wouldn't have known it from the way that the fans responded to them. So that was my big takeaway from the preseason, is that the fans on Vancouver Island are legit, and kudos to them.
My big takeaway was Chase Bryce making you eat your cheesy puffs, JC, stuffing them down your throat, showing you he's a potential real quarterback.
He looked very good in the limited action that he played. Now, admittedly, it wasn't against Edmonton's first team defense. And the other thing to consider is it's also year 4 for Chase Bryce, right? So he should look good against backups in the preseason. He knows the game. This isn't a rookie that's coming in there, but full credit to him. I thought he commanded the offense well, and he's made some changes to his body and his training regimen in the off season as well. Perhaps I've been too harsh on him in the past, or perhaps I've motivated him to up his game. However you want to look at it, I'm a little bit more comfortable with the Lions QB situation now than I was before that game, although I'm still not entirely sold.
Let's see what he does going forward. I do want to note a new contributor to 3DownNation.com, Jack Moore, who played collegiate football at Wilfrid Laurier University and is known in media circles in the Golden Horseshoe area, is going to be our Tiger Cats contributor this season. Really excited to have him aboard. I thought his first analysis piece was in depth and gave some Ticats fans a real look at how that team looked like in their first preseason game. So welcome aboard, Jack. He joins a group of our respected contributors around the country. And shout out to our guys bringing it. Yes, it's not the regular season, but you boys and our guys out there around the country, our contributors, are already in mid-season form. Let's get to it. We're discussing Taylor Elgersma's CFL preseason debut.
A former All-Star joining Team Canada's flag football program.
Chad Kelly's return to the field after 18 months.
The Saskatchewan Roughriders backup quarterback battle.
Preseason power rankings. But first,
possible CFL expansion talk has been reinvigorated with intriguing reports from 2 potential markets. In Halifax, an American group of developers are working on a proposal for a $1.5 billion entertainment district 30 minutes outside of the city, which would include plans for a 25,000 plus seat stadium that could accommodate a football franchise. Meanwhile, in Quebec City, Laval Rougeeur President Jacques Tanguay stated in a French language interview that his organization would be, quote, ardent supporters, unquote, of an expansion team if a stadium was built in the city. Which story is better news for the Canadian Football League?
I'll read the statement that 3DownNation.com procured from the Canadian Football League, and it will answer the question because we specifically asked the CFL League office for a statement about the Halifax proposal, and they said this: we're encouraged by the interest from prospective ownership groups in various Canadian markets. Until there's more to report, the league remains focused on its 9 current teams in the upcoming season. To me, at first blush, the fact that there wasn't any language in there directly speaking to Halifax shows me that Quebec City has a real possibility here. Now, that said, with all expansion, fellas, as we know all too well, stadium before team. It doesn't matter that the Atlantic Schooners, shout out Hodge with the hat on today, were granted a conditional franchise back just a handful of years ago because you have to have a stadium. So that is still the key factor in Quebec City, Halifax, or anywhere else that you want to talk about in Canada. But the fact that Jacques Tanguay has completely changed his tune about the Canadian Football League possibly coming to Quebec City is absolutely massive for the league. The league should be doing cartwheels right now around their head office there in downtown Toronto. That is major news for them. And guys, I think Randy Ambrosie at the end of his tenure sort of teased this, right? He seemed to pivot his messaging towards Quebec City and away from Halifax. So I think that that should be right now the league's focus, is figuring out a way that it can work. You know, ideally, the CFL gets to 12 teams and has a team in Halifax. Perhaps let's get to 10 and 11 first before we start talking about 12. There's been some fans out there that are saying, well, you could have a team that's based in either London or Windsor to get to 12. We need to get to 10 first and even have 9 running well. But I do think Quebec City, based on what Tanguay said and the statement that we got from the head office of the Canadian Football League, points to Quebec City at least having the shortest term possible upside. But make no mistake, either of these proposals are still a long way away, and Quebec City doesn't even have a formal proposal that we know about yet.
Yeah, credit to Zane Woodford of allnovascotia.com for breaking this story in Halifax. It's an interesting idea, right? Essentially, American private equity coming and spending $1.5 billion. I'm actually not even clear if this is American dollars or Canadian dollars, but to build not even just a stadium, but a giant entertainment complex. And look, this is not a big story, in my opinion, because I think the chances of this thing being built are not high. But I'm just speculating from the outside. This is not my story. This is not my reporting. I'm simply reacting to it. But the fact that outside money wants to come in and do this, I do think is interesting, right? It's intriguing. I think it has to be at least a small positive step or a small positive story or a small reason for positivity regarding this. And look, I've said this before, I'll say it again. I think it's honestly poor leadership on the part of the folks in Halifax at the municipal level, the provincial level, etc., that they do not have a stadium. They've got a fervent soccer fan base there that pays money to watch games at a stadium with no running water, taking leaks in porta potties. Like, it is a fantastic product that has a complete Bush League stadium infrastructure, right? And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. If I, as a sports fan in 2026, am paying my money to go to a sporting event, I expect to have running water and a seat that is permanent and comfortable. And that is not what they have at the Halifax Wanderers grounds. Now, you can't change the past, right? There's nothing we could do to wave the magic wand and have them build the stadium 40 years ago. But Halifax is exploding in population. They need a stadium. They should have built it prior. They didn't. They should build it soon. I don't understand why they would like to build this facility 30 minutes north of Halifax. There's a great, as Justin and I saw in 2023 at Touchdown Atlantic, we did some reporting about different spots a potential stadium could go. There is room inside the city near the entertainment district and near the waterfront. It's a beautiful city, and I'm not even going to pretend to be impartial. I desperately want a team to go to Halifax so that I can cover a Grey Cup out east. I fell in love with Halifax. I thought it was amazing, and I think that the CFL would do really, really well there if they ever got there with the team. It's been 40 years since this initial conversation was started by then CFL Commissioner Jake Gadar. I think everybody wants this to happen. The question is, can the stadium get built? I'm not sure, again, that this is the right way to do it. I'm not sure and there's conversation about a domed stadium. I don't know why Halifax, of all places, would need a domed stadium. But regardless, this is some chatter. There's talk about bringing money into the region without the government having to shell out a ton of it. So again, I think these are early signs. I think there's positivity here. I got a bunch of questions about it, but regardless, I think Halifax is the best option for CFL expansion, though, for the reasons Justin laid out. I think Quebec City is interesting in the long term as well. Though I think the reason a lot of people have said, oh, Quebec City, Quebec City, Quebec City, is because they envision the Quebec City CFL team playing at Stade Telus where the Rouge et Or play. And that was the crux of the interview with Jacques Tanguay, saying, yeah, we want a CFL team here, but they are not using our building. Our building is a Laval building. It's not suitable for CFL, and they're not wanting to change it. That was the takeaway I had. So it's good that we're having this conversation. It's good that there's some momentum behind these two stories, but it's early days. And I think that's reflected, as Justin astutely pointed out, by the CFL statement.
To your point about the location, Hodge, I've seen the argument that putting that entertainment district and stadium complex outside the city limits, out by the airport, makes sense because it's on the highway, and that might facilitate a little bit more of that regional team feel, allowing people to get into the area a little bit easier. There's going to be hotels as part of that project as well. I can imagine somebody making the drive along the highway from elsewhere in the Maritimes, staying at the hotel near the stadium, and then going to games. I think that is part of the logic for that. Now, what you'll lose is the ability to walk from downtown Halifax, which I agree with you, Hodge, is a fantastic city, and go to a game, which I think is much of the appeal of that particular location, because Halifax is such a cool market to have sports in. And you've seen the success of teams like the Wanderers in the CPL, or, the Halifax Mooseheads in hockey, just having that success because they're embedded close to that downtown core. You would lose that with this proposal. Now, in terms of which of these stories is better for the CFL, I'm of the opinion that neither of these currently are significant news for expansion, because there is nothing happening in either spot yet. It's a base level proposal, and it's a comment from Tanguay. And you could lean towards the comment from Tanguay as more important because of how powerful he is in that city, and because he's been more pessimistic when asked about expansion before. But if you really look at the comments, right, he's saying the same thing he did a few years ago in terms of the possibility of the team, which is that there is no stadium yet, and there are no plans to build a stadium, at least in Halifax. For whatever you believe of that proposal, whether it's realistic or not, there's at least some groundwork happening. We've had no reports of that yet in Quebec. So I actually think the Halifax story is slightly more significant, although neither of them are big leaps towards expansion.
That's fair, JC. There's a long way to go for both of these possibilities to happen. And the major question mark with Halifax is who is the money man or woman or group? You have to have money. The bank's not just going to give you $1.5 billion as much as you might want it. Otherwise, everybody else would be asking for it. So that's why I think Tanguay's comments stand out the most to me. And to just double click on what JC said, there's still a long way to go. But the fact that he's done an about face here, because I believe it was 2023 when he had comments in a similar way in a French language interview where he said essentially he didn't think the CFL would work there. So the fact now that he's saying, yes, and we're paraphrasing, I believe the CFL would work in Quebec City, but not in a building like this, because he was talking about hypothetically, if there was going to be, a team in Quebec City at Pep Stadium, that they would have to essentially demolish the stadium and redo it, except for maybe some of the seats that they have on the far side. But for those who don't know or who have never been there, pretty sure Hodge has, JC, I don't think you have. The far side of the stadium away from the press box, there's nice seating. But the near side is essentially like bench seating. There's a press box that is above it, but that press box is actually attached to an indoor facility, which is great, and the Rouge et Or make use of. But Tanguay said you would have to knock down that facility to get in the proper stands and facilities that you need in terms of washrooms and vendors and all the rest to have a proper CFL stadium. So I think there seems to be more light in Quebec City just based on Tanguay's comments because there is a corporate base there. What struck me most the first time I went to Laval and ever since is the amount of corporate sponsors that the Rouge et Or have. That's the Rouge et Or who play 4 regular season home games per year, usually 5 because they're hosting an RSEQ semifinal. And then it's up in the air whether or not it ends up being 6 or more in terms of how far they get. But that's just for 4 regular season home games. So if Tanguay's interested and his business team or people can help bring those corporate partners over into a CFL partnership, I think more games would just mean potentially more money for everybody. So that's why I think his comments are more notable. Canadian quarterback Taylor Elgersma made his preseason CFL debut for the Blue Bombers on Saturday in Saskatoon, completing 6 of 13 passes for 78 yards and 2 interceptions. The performance came after 2 other candidates for the number 2 job, veteran Terry Wilson and rookie Peyton Thorne, chose to leave the team and are currently on the suspended list. Is there cause for concern in Winnipeg?
I don't know that I'd say there's cause for concern, but I do think going into training camp, you looked at this quarterback battle and went, okay, this has arguably gone from a position of weakness last year to a possible position of strength. A guy like Peyton Thorne, 48 collegiate starts and a winning record between Michigan State and Auburn, right? 2 big programs, dual threat guy, big arm, all those things that you like to see. Son of a coach, right? A ton of really good intangibles, and was coached by a Grey Cup winning quarterback and head coach at Auburn in Kent Austin. Now he's gone, right? And Terry Wilson. And look, these 2 guys might not have made the roster. I think especially with the way Taylor Elgersma, just based on, I think, the reps in camp, has very clearly been made the number 2. And based on the preseason performance, I mean, we won't know what hypothetically the Bombers were planning for that preseason game before these 2 passers left. But I think it's fair to speculate that a lack of opportunity might have been the reason why both of these guys chose to leave the team. All of a sudden, this club has a lot fewer options. And I think Bryce Perkins played relatively well late in that game. He had the ugly pick at the end, but 12 seconds left, 2nd and 20, like you kind of have to throw the ball into traffic. There's not really much of an option. And I thought that he ripped a couple of really nice balls, particularly that one deep, I think it was a deep dig to Joey Corcoran. That was one of the best catches I saw all through the preseason. Not as nice as the catch we saw from Nate Demoniak of the BC Lions, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show. But getting back to Elgersma, I polled a bunch of people who I trust in and around the league about what they would have given Elgersma's performance in terms of a grade. And I didn't have anybody reply back with better than a B-. but I also didn't have anybody reply back with worse than a C. And I think that's fair. This is a guy and the stat line is awful. Like, let's get that out of the way. 6 of 13, just laid it out, 78 yards, 2 picks. That's bad. But when you actually watch the games, I mean, his first throw, he hits Christian Fredrickson, who was in for an injured Ontario Wilson, was in the starting lineup, but isn't projected to be a starter this year, on second and long, and Fredrickson just drops it. It's like, okay. And then the second interception, Elgersma rifles the ball into an open receiver. The receiver falls down. The ball is then up for grabs. These are things that are not Elgersma's fault. Some things, though, that were, with like the first interception, I don't even know who the intended receiver was. The only 2 players with a shot at the ball were both Saskatchewan Roughriders defensive backs. It's possible one of the receivers ran the wrong route, but we're not going to know that because knowing Taylor Elgersma, he's not going to throw somebody under the bus and say, oh, well, I threw a perfect ball and this idiot ran to the wrong spot, right? He's not going to do that. So I think there were some things to like. I think there were some things to not like. I honestly will say I expected Elgersma to play better. He is a rookie in the CFL, but he's also a guy who has been this is his 6th training camp, his 3rd in just the last year. He looked, I thought, better in the preseason playing in the NFL for the Green Bay Packers than he did for the Blue Bombers on Saturday. That being said, I thought the corner route that he threw to Dorian Singer was absolute money. And that's a throw I've seen him make time and time again, even just in the few practices I've been to. And honestly, I think, whether it's, Ricky Ray made a career throwing that ball to Fred Stamps. Darian Durant made a career throwing that ball to Weston Dressler. I think Elgersma throws that one particular throw as well as anybody I've seen in the Canadian Football League. But I didn't think that he lit it up. I didn't think he fell on his face. Again, the stats are ugly. He played better than the stats, but he didn't play great, right? Like, I would personally go into the C+-ish area. And his comments after the game, and Mike O'Shea's comments after the game, I thought were on point, essentially saying, look, you don't have to press every single throw. It's notable that his first completion came on just a little 5-yard drag to Kevin Clarcius that Clarcius then took for 19 yards, right? Sometimes the open underneath receiver is the right option. You don't have to force it, even if you got that big cannon of an arm that can throw it all over the place. So it was a good first shot for Elgersma. I thought he partially took advantage of it. And I'm interested to see how he looks in the second preseason game at Princess Auto Stadium when the BC Lions come to town.
I think this is just one of those circumstances where, the hype about a top prospect got away from us a little bit. And so it put a ton of pressure on this first look at Elgersma, who again is a CFL rookie, who has never been on a CFL field before and was working with, a group of backups as well, which needs to be noted considering some of the drops that he suffered. And he looked like a CFL rookie tends to look in his first CFL action. I don't think you have to read into that and say that we overvalued Elgersma or that he's not a guy who can become the heir apparent in Winnipeg. I think you saw the obvious arm talent in that performance, but part of the expectations that were placed upon him made him press, to Mike O'Shea's point. And I do think that's something that may be a bit of a tendency at times for Taylor Elgersma. And as he gets older and more mature in his career, he'll have to address that. I think we saw it in the Vanier Cup game that Laurier lost as well against Laval, where he let it up all season. And then in that critical moment, pressed a little bit too hard, made some uncharacteristic mistakes. I see a lot of parallels between that performance and his first preseason game. I think you'll see a lot better from him next week because the pressure is really off. The external pressure is still on, but in Winnipeg, this battle is all but decided. He's going to be on this roster almost certainly, and I think he's going to be the backup quarterback as well. And some of that is just because 2 of the other candidates, as we mentioned, saw the writing on the wall. They likely saw the reps that they were getting, did not believe that they were getting a real shot, and chose to leave the team. They didn't go off to pursue another opportunity. They're still on the suspended list. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers still own their CFL rights, but they chose to leave anyway. And I think that speaks volumes about what this team's plans were with Elgersma. And I think he's going to be given every single opportunity to fail because they believe so strongly in him. Now he needs to accept the fact that he can learn and make mistakes, and he doesn't have to throw a touchdown on every single pass. He just has to be himself. And that was the message that Mike O'Shea was sending after the game and saying, hey, enjoy yourself. Smile a little bit more. It's okay. You've made it here to pro football, and you're going to stay.
There's a lot to consider here, and by no means was Taylor Elgersma's performance even good. I thought it was very average, but if there's a couple more caught balls, I think people might view it differently. And then also the fact that he was going against a bunch of Saskatchewan's starting defense. And Corey Mace was starting to, mix it up a little bit. This wasn't just a straight up vanilla man-to-man basic zone concepts that he was seeing. So I'm not necessarily making excuses for him. I'm just trying to give an apt comparison, like I think that we've tried to do with Braden Shager, for example, who we'll talk about in a little bit. For Elgersma, he's been in how many training camps and had to learn how many playbooks in the last even calendar year? Let's just think about this, okay? It's a brand new playbook for him with Tommy Condell, which from what I understand is very intricate and demanding. You just talk to people who are around him in Hamilton with the Kent Austin offense. It is an offense that you're not just going to master in a couple weeks of training camp and with some virtual meetings in the offseason. So I think you need some more time in the offense for him to feel comfortable. And I thought Mike O'Shea did a great job post-game, as both of you noted here, talking about him just, calming down. And it's not the professional level, so I hesitate to say it, but when I was at the University of Guelph, I played my best football ultimately when Kyle Walters got me to understand that when you jump levels, in this instance, going from high school to university and then getting into my upper years in university, the best play that you can make is keeping your team on the football field. You don't have to score a touchdown on every single play. And that's a mentality that I had in my middle years at the University of Guelph. I can especially think of my second year, right, when I kind of got comfortable. But you just need to stay on the field, keep the chains moving, take the throw that's there. Is it always sexy? No, but that's ultimately what wins football games at the professional level. And then you can talk about all the things that come with it. Time of possession, wearing the defense down, setting up those deep shots for later in the game. So I think Taylor Elgersma will learn that going forward. But make no mistake, Hodge pointed it out. This kid has special arm talent. Now, special arm talent does not always translate over to being a good actual quarterback, because those are two totally different things in my mind. Taylor Elgersma has a photographic memory. I think he will learn this playbook under Tommy Condell quickly and become comfortable. But this was also his first, professional action since being in training camp with the Green Bay Packers and dealing with that playbook where he's putting in 150 plays. It's also him making a transition back to the Canadian Football League and going on the road to do so in a rowdy Griffith Stadium. Yes, there was about 7,500 people there, so it's not the loudest, but those fans were still pretty rowdy from what people on the ground there tell me. So all those things considered, I think it was a decent performance from Taylor Elgersma that he can build on, but he's going to have to continue to prove that he can be that guy that everybody is viewing as an heir apparent in Winnipeg.
Well, and I'll add this too. I thought if you're looking for reasons for concern in Bomberland, how about the fact that the offensive line could not get an inch along the line of scrimmage? The running game was completely non-existent. It didn't matter if it was Brady Oliveira back there, Stevie Rocker, or Michael Krasike or Matthew Peter. It didn't matter who had the ball in their hands. There was no room to run, which I thought hurt not only Elgersma, but also Perkins. The pass pro I thought was better, right? But this is now an inverse of what the Bombers were in 2025. An O-line that I thought could road grade relatively well in the running game, but struggled in pass pro. I thought Zach Collaros had all day to throw. Elgersma early on had all day to throw. They couldn't open any rushing lanes. So I think that was an interesting thought from the game, that at least that I had as a takeaway. But is the quarterback room an area for concern? My answer, getting back to the original question, would have to be no, but I am less bullish, if that's fair to say. I still think Elgersma is going to be a good quarterback in this league. I thought Bryce Perkins showed some nice stuff. And actually, Zach Collaros, so that was great in his one series. 3 connections with Tim White, 57 yards, touchdown drive. That's got to be encouraging if you're a Blue Bombers fan after a down year, 2 down years, really, from Zach Collaros. But yeah, I would have liked to see more from Elgersma, and I'm interested to see if he can give more, because I think he can. I think he will. It wasn't a disaster, but he didn't live up to the hype. And fair enough, JC, maybe we hyped him up too much. But this is a guy who was in an NFL camp last year, and I think we all agreed should have at least made a practice roster in the NFL. That last part did not happen, but he played well in the NFL preseason. And when you play well in the NFL preseason, in my opinion, you should at least get on a PR. Didn't happen. So we'll see what happens when Elgersma takes the field again at Princess Auto Stadium against the Lions. Toronto Argonauts quarterback Chad Kelly made his return to the field after 18 months on Saturday, completing 3 of 7 passes for 29 yards and rushing twice for 24 yards in 2 series of preseason action in Hamilton. What did you make of the performance?
To be honest, I'm not quite sure what to make of that performance, because I thought there were some good signs from Chad Kelly at moments. He made some nice throws. I thought it was a positive development that he felt comfortable enough to take off on that long run that he had, considering the injury that he suffered. But at the same time, I also thought there were moments where he maybe didn't see the field as we've become accustomed to him seeing it, where he double clutched, where he didn't make quick decisions or was hesitant. And normally, I would say, well, is this a sign of a quarterback who's lacking a little bit of confidence, who knows what he's supposed to do and is forcing himself to do it, but isn't quite comfortable yet? But it was also happening in a monsoon. So was he just double clutching because he couldn't handle the football because it was slick wet and he couldn't see the field because there was driving rain in his face? I think the circumstances that game was played under make it incredibly difficult to assess where Chad Kelly is at in his return to play. So I think I left that game with as many questions as I entered into it with.
Yeah, the rain didn't help getting a fair assessment of where Chad Kelly is at about a year and a half after suffering that gruesome leg injury in the East Final in November 2024. It did seem like, though, on that long QB scamper, we'll call it, that he was relatively comfortable in taking off. It didn't seem like he hesitated to me there. But, quite honestly, overall, I think Chad Kelly needs to show that he's this elite quarterback consistently, and he can get back there in terms of the one that everybody likes to talk about him as from 2023. Because in 2024, when he came back, he was average 10 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Like, those numbers don't blow you away. In fact, there are quarterbacks out there who are not starters in the Canadian Football League that have better touchdown to interception ratios in their career. Now, that 2023 season was definitely special from Kelly, but that Argos team was absolutely loaded. So I think it's a completely different question mark, and there's 2 of them for Chad Kelly going into 2026. We need to see that he looks comfortable and is somewhat back to his old self, but this Argonauts roster is nowhere near, at least at this point in training camp through one preseason game, nowhere near close to the roster that team fielded in 2023. So Chad Kelly is going to have to put this team on his shoulders in a major way if the Argos are going to be competitive in the East Division. So the rain made it hard to assess. I did think he looked comfortable on that long run, but we still need to see a bigger sample size.
I agree with all that. I thought the best play of the game for me, and I will confess, I did not see the second half of this game. I went to the Edmonton BC game. But the best play of the game that I saw was the Chad Kelly scamper, the long run that he had. He looked comfortable running. He looked like he was trusting that leg. He did slide at the end, but any franchise quarterback, I think is wise to slide, particularly come the preseason. So the conditions made it extremely hard to throw the football. I'm not going to put any weight, positive or negative, on his passing numbers. The question for me is, will Chad Kelly be mobile, which is a big part of his game? No, he's not Trey Ford, but his mobility is part of what keeps opposing defenses honest. And I think that's part of the reason the offensive line struggled so badly in 2025. Nick Arbuckle does not have as big of an arm as Chad Kelly, and he is not as athletic as Chad Kelly. And when you can't necessarily kill defenses over the top, and you also can't take off to run, opposing defenses can pin their ears back and get after you. They cannot get after Kelly the same way that they were able to get after Arbuckle. And so the fact that he's able to move around, do things with his legs, and still has that speed, still has that mobility, I think it's a big boost if you're a fan of the Boatman. So again, small sample size, and I'm not even trusting all of it because of the weather conditions, but for just his running ability alone, I'll give it a passing grade.
And let's be clear, guys, this conversation is not going away anytime soon. It's not going to go away if Chad Kelly plays in the second preseason game. It's not going to go away after his first week. We're going to be talking about Chad Kelly and his return and whether he's that same player again for several weeks going into the season until he definitively proves it. And, Kelly is obviously a controversial figure, but I saw some of the conversation between the detractors and Argos supporters online this week, and there were people saying, well, Chad Kelly is the face of the CFL. And let me be clear, he's not, right? He is not that player right now. He may have been immediately after winning the MOP, but after everything that's happened, the suspension and the injury, he is nowhere close. He may be the most recognizable name south of the border, but that doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. And right now, I'm filling out my ballot for the TSN top 50 coming up here in the next couple of days. And Chad Kelly, to be entirely honest, will not be on it because there are too many question marks about him right now. Now, if he can get back to 2023 Chad Kelly, I've been as big a believer in his athletic talent as anybody in the league. I wanted him to start for the Argos before he started for them. And he can get back and be a top 10 player on my ballot. But right now, I have to see it to believe it. I think he can get back there, but I'm no more confident now than I was before that first preseason outing.
Let's make it clear. Nathan Rourke is unquestionably the face of the Canadian Football League. Canadian, American, alien, global, or otherwise, that dude is the face of the league. And yes, it matters because of how he has consistently conducted himself off the field, going all the way back to playing high school in Oakville. Nathan Rourke, by all accounts, and we're not with him every single day, has consistently held himself to a high standard off the field. That matters in marketing. It is a major reason why I believe Nathan Rourke is the poster boy for the Canadian Football League right now. It just so happens that he is Canadian, which I think does help a lot. But Nathan Rourke is the face of the Canadian Football League, whether Argos fans want to hear it or not.
I love that you said alien before global. That is wild. That is wild. I love it. For the record, I did my ballot for the TSN Top 50 a few weeks ago because I'm very conscientious and I do it right away. I did not have Chad Kelly on my list either. He was one of the last players, and for full transparency, you only get 40 players that you can vote for. They make the top 50 from everyone's top 40. So if I actually had 50 on my ballot, I think Chad Kelly would have made it. He was the last quarterback I was not able to fit. I had 5 quarterbacks, and I have no qualms about revealing the order. I had Nathan Rourke 1. I had Bo Levi Mitchell 2. I had Davis Alexander 3. I had Vernon Adams Jr. 4. And I had Trevor Harris 5. Kelly would have been my 6th quarterback. I didn't have room for him. So those are not the particular spots for each of those quarterbacks, but that is how I had them ordered on my ballot.
There was only 3 on my ballot. It was Nathan Rourke, Bo Levi Mitchell, Davis Alexander. Everyone else, I probably would have had both Vernon Adams Jr. and Trevor Harris in my top 50 had I been able to fill out a top 50, but they did not make my 40. Chad Kelly, he's just too big of a question mark right now. And as much as I do believe he can get back to where he was, I'm not confident enough to project that on the top 50 ballot, like I was confident enough to project Nathan Rourke getting back last year. I did have him at 2 on my ballot. I know he was 1 on your ballot last year, Hodge, which was incredibly prophetic, but I don't feel that level of confidence in Chad Kelly. There's just too many questions.
I will reveal my top 5 really quick if you want me to.
No, save it for the website because you usually do an article off it.
Yeah, I have done that in the past. That's true.
You've given your top 5 quarterbacks. That's enough of a tease. There's a lot of jokes I could make here, but I do not do rankings well. So I'm happy that you guys are involved in this.
Dunk just bows out of any rankings.
You could be like, hey, Justin, could you please rank the following 2 things? A penthouse suite in Vancouver or a pizza box in Winnipeg? And he's like, I can't decide. I can't rank those things, man. I can't do it.
Classic Fed Sigger Dunk.
Thank God we have you guys to try to pull me off.
You're just hanging us out to dry so that when we're wrong, you can rib us on the podcast.
True.
I feel like that's not really fair if I'm not going to stick my neck out and rank.
Now that I brought up my ballot, I am looking at one decision I made, already ripping myself. So, yeah, it's not a big one, but it's a small. I got one guy a little too high, one guy a little too low, but that's fine.
See, this is why you got to wait until the absolute last day, because then you can have anxiety about it for extra time.
There you go.
The Saskatchewan Roughriders were the first team to conclude their 2-game preseason slate, but their decision at backup quarterback remains unclear. Jack Cohn and Braden Shager both threw pick sixes in their second outing, but bounced back with critical touchdown passes in a thrilling win. What would you do if you were Corey Mace?
It's very clear to me. Braden Shager's your backup quarterback. If we're going just based off recent play, Shager looked way better in Calgary, and Shager looked better than Cohn in Saskatoon. And again, I ask this question. If you took the names and numbers off both of these players' uniforms and asked me to identify who has been in the CFL for multiple years, you would be pointing at Shager. Did he look great in terms of the interceptions that he threw? No, but he keeps fighting, bouncing back through adversity. And what stands out the most to me is his processing speed. He gets through his reads, and if there's nothing there, is able to escape the pocket with great efficiency. Meanwhile, Jack Cohn continues to hang on to the football. He didn't look good to start that game, was able to bounce back in terms of Cohn's overall performance. But sometimes, guys, I hate to say it, there are really hard workers who can grind the tape and be trusted by Trevor Harris with projects to help Harris get ready to go out there as the starting quarterback. But that doesn't always translate to the field. And I need to see it translate more with Cohn. If I'm going into the regular season, as you asked, a head coach in the Canadian Football League, I would rather have Braden Shager as my backup quarterback. And I would also rather have Braden Shager instead of potentially risking losing him, on the practice roster. But I don't even think that needs to be a decision that the Riders have to make. I think it's simple. You carry 4 quarterbacks and you put one of them on the newly created 2-man reserve list, which are 18 fully paid jobs that have been created by the PA. That was part of the negotiations for the new playoff system that we're going to see in 2027. But they actually start in 2026 for the purposes of these 2 fully paid reserve positions. So I think if you're Saskatchewan, you stash Shager there, or you simply ask yourself, and I'll ask you guys this. If Shager or Cohn were on a practice roster and you were an opposing team, Hodge, which one would you go pick up?
Shager.
Shager.
It's simple. So to me, it's that clear cut. I understand that you want to give Cone the respect that he has earned in terms of grinding away and getting to this opportunity where he could be the backup. But Shager's what, early 20s, 22 or 23 years old. He's showing so much promise in the preseason. He already jumped Tommy Stevens on the depth chart, and he continues to just have that it factor. Like sometimes you got to remove whatever's happened in the past and look at what is staring you straight in the face, and it's the game tape that's popping off from Shager's perspective.
To me, the answer is you dress Harris as your one, Cone as two with a short leash, and Shager as your three, and then you play Tommy Stevens at tight end because that is evidently what they think he is. I know Tommy Stevens has been all over social media this offseason talking about how I'm a real quarterback. You completed 2 passes for 11 yards in the preseason after being given a short opportunity in both games to make plays. And look, Tommy Stevens is a hell of a football player. I'm not taking that away from him by any stretch of the imagination. He is fantastic at short yardage, and I genuinely think he could be impactful in other ways. He was a tight end for a brief stint with the Indianapolis Colts, if I remember correctly, before coming north. So, like, he's obviously got tremendous traits, athleticism, size, all those things, and you want him to continue doing short yardage. To me, it's just silly to use one of their roster spots on a guy who evidently is not one of your 3 best passers as a quarterback. So that would be my take. And the reason I have Cone over Shager is I think if you go to Shager first and you keep Cone in that third string spot, you potentially ruin his confidence. And if everything's a competition and you want to go just by the last few weeks, I agree Shager is better. And I think given his mobility, Shager has more upside, his youth. He is, as we have previously said on the pod, a man of indeterminate age. He's either 22 or 23. I look forward to our first opportunity to straight up ask him, sir, can you please share your exact age? There is a contradiction online. You are apparently simultaneously 22, 23. You were born in Pandora's box or Pandora's... No, no, that's not Pandora's box. Schrodinger's cat. You were born in the same box as Schrodinger's cat. But regardless, I think you go with Cone as your 2. But again, short leash, because once you go to Braden Shager, you're probably staying.
I'm fully on the Braden Shager train at this stage. And as good as he's looked in the preseason, it wasn't because of his performance against Calgary. And it wasn't even for his performance in Saskatoon against Winnipeg. What finally sold me 100% on Braden Shager was watching his interview after that second preseason game. Because I don't know if everyone took a minute to watch that interview, but it is impressive. He is squinting like this the whole time, and our listeners on podcast won't see it, but my right eye is fully closed here because he had a gash underneath it from getting poked in the eye, and he said, "Yeah, I couldn't see through that eye for the entire fourth quarter. Nothing. I was just closing it and throwing it with the left. And you know what? I'd do it again. I wasn't going to let them take me off the field. I'd close both eyes and throw it as long as we could get the win. It's worth all the pain." And the way he stood up in that interview with that injury, the confidence and the passion that he had, I said, that is a guy that I would want as my quarterback. And it's no disrespect to Jack Cohn. I know he was a tough guy in college as well. He's accomplished a lot in his career, but I think the momentum is entirely on Braden Shager's side, and he's got that it factor that makes you have confidence in him as a future CFL starter, even down the line when you're looking for the heir apparent to Trevor Harris. Ideally, you keep both of these guys around, but I think you have to give Shager that backup job. And quite frankly, if I'm the Saskatchewan Roughriders, I'd be tempted to call up a couple of these teams that maybe don't have such great backup situations, potentially the Calgary Stampeders, and say, hey, what would you be willing to offer for Jack Cohn? because I don't need 4 quarterbacks, but this is a guy who's got multiple years of CFL experience. We really like him. He showed well in the preseason. What would it take for you to take him off our hands? Because I think you could utilize that asset better in that way than just carrying 4 quarterbacks throughout the season. Shager, to me, has earned the right to be the guy, and now you've got to manage the rest of the roster accordingly.
Hodge out here with a couple interesting takes. He's willing to blast Tommy Stevens as a quarterback, but he doesn't want to hurt Jack Cohn's confidence.
Well, how many passes did Jack Cohn complete in the preseason?
I don't think it's about
I believe
preseason
it-
completions. My point is, it's professional football. I don't care about little Jackie Cohn's confidence. Braden Shager has
His confidence?
played better football.
You don't care about his confidence? I care about his confidence.
No. I mean, as a person, yes,
Look.
we should all care about each other from a societal perspective. But in
Yes.
professional football, if your confidence is shattered, your confidence is shattered. The kids outplayed you.
Fair enough. Fair enough. It is pro football. It is do or die. I'll just say, like, and look, Tommy Stevens, again, I'm not taking anything away from him as a football player, but he was given almost no reps, right, in either game. I watched both Saskatchewan Roughriders games in full, and he got a series when the injury initially happened. Like, Jack Cohn took a nasty shot, a legal shot, but a really nasty shot. Stevens came in for one series. Like, did he get any more time? Like, it was very,
Shager.
Yeah, it was. No, Cohn left the game, I thought, and then
No,
Shager
Yeah,
left.
Cohn left the
with
game
eye.
and Stevens came in. Shager didn't
Okay.
come in until the second half.
But Stevens came in for Shager after he got poked in the eye at the start
Yeah,
of the
so
fourth.
in other words,
Yes,
if you
he's
are
talking about
only
Cohn.
getting into the game to operate the offense when guys with less experience than you are getting hurt, and then you're immediately being taken off the field when those quarterbacks go back in the game, that to me means that the coaching staff, who is trying to assess everyone's ability to throw the football, wants to see everyone else more than you. So that's what I'm making the assessment on. But regardless, fair enough about the confidence thing. I just think it's always easier to go from the vet to the youngin than go from the youngin to the vet, right? If you put the youngin out there and they, the bed, everyone's ripping you, going, why didn't you play the vet? You've had him here for years. He's been learning. He's been studying. He's been working his tail off. Whereas if you go the other way, right, you put the vet out there and what's the bed, everyone goes, oh, I guess he just doesn't got it. Let's go to the kid, right?
Yeah,
it's
but-
easier to go one way than the other.
Should decisions from a pro football team really be made based on what is easier to justify to the fan base?
Well, you're also
like you've already
justifying
just
it.
won a Grey Cup. Like you've got the goodwill built in at this stage. I don't think you should make decisions based on, well, I can justify this better.
Well, it's not necessarily, when I say people, I'll be more specific. Yes, it's partly to the fans, and obviously we all know the Riders have a fervent fan base, but it's also to the people in the building, right? If you as the coaches or you as the personnel people, whatever, are making a decision to play Braden Shager over Jack Cohn, and your defensive players watch Braden Shager go out and struggle badly, you could have people in your building, players or assistant coaches, assistant personnel people, whatever, going, why the heck are we doing this, right? So I'm not just saying, and this isn't even Rider specific, for any team, when you make these decisions, yes, fan consideration shouldn't be the determining factor, but it's not just fans who have thoughts and feelings about these decisions. It's all kinds of decision makers and stakeholders in your building, and that is a significant factor.
That can go the other way, though.
Point, but like
the locker room has
can we
seen
pass
how
around a
Braden
poll?
Shager has played. The
True.
locker room is
Yeah.
going to say to themselves, we want the best players on the field. And Hodge, two things here. First of all, I'm just busting your chops. The second is you've clearly never listened to the post-game call-in show, because all of the fans who are calling in, texting in, the majority, I should specify, the first 2 weeks from the Riders postseason games wanted to talk about Braden Shager and were concerned about Jack Cohn. So I think the fans' consensus, small sample size admittedly, would be that they are excited about Braden Shager potentially being the heir apparent, and the fact that he's only 22 or 23 years old mean, say you might have this guy for 10, 12, 15, 20 years, depending if he can get up to that Trevor Harris level. 20 years may be a bit of a stretch, but I think everybody understands what I'm getting at. So the sentiment in Riderville, at least, is that they see the upside in the kid and they're worried about Cohen. I think your locker room could potentially see that too, looking at a guy, okay, who's been here for a long time and say, well, why is he still the backup? This guy outplayed him. Isn't this what Corey Mace talks about all the time? Is we want competition. We want the best players on the field and stacked in order on our roster. I think, honestly, you could confuse the locker room a little bit if Jagger isn't your two. Now, I get it. The likelihood is that Cone is the two to start the season, to your point, Hodge, because he's the veteran. But I think Jagger, undoubtedly, to everybody, front office, Riderville, anyone who watches those games or who has watched those games, has been the better quarterback.
And I think the question is, if Jack Cohn is your two, like how many reps are going to be left for Braden Jagger as presumably, given the fact that I believe Tommy Stevens will still be listed as a quarterback and as your number 3 as the short yardage guy for development, right? He'll be the 4, in that reserve spot or on the practice roster. It is hard during a season to carve out reps for young players for development, particularly at the quarterback position. If you've got him working with the twos, there's going to be more time for him to get accustomed to the Canadian game. So it's not as if just keeping him around is going to inherently just benefit him, right? If you think he needs reps, then you've got to give those to him in practice, and making him the number 2 is the best way to do that. Cone has already had more reps at this stage. Admittedly, he was not the number 2 last year, so he had more limited reps like I'm describing, but he has been around for several seasons at this stage. I think you need to see now what Jagger can do when he's given a real opportunity to seize.
That's a great point, JC. There's not a lot of reps to go around. And if you're the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and there's a thought process here that Trevor Harris is year to year, so that means there's a chance he continues to play, or there's a chance that he doesn't continue to play. No one really knows at this point, not even Trevor Harris, admittedly. But you want Jagger to have that time. Jack Cohn has played in how many preseason games now? Jack Cohn has played in regular season games. When he's played in the regular season, he has not looked good. Like, if that was almost any other quarterback in a bunch of other situations, he wouldn't even be on the roster. And if Jagger got to the practice roster, he would be gone in a New York minute. Like, he would be gone so quick, other teams would pick that kid up 22, 23 to show that promise. He would simply be gone. And this conversation actually leads me into a topic off the top of my head. So bear with me, JC, but there's all kinds of pressure on Drew Brown. Because if we're talking about competition in Ottawa and that team turning the corner to be a contender, Jake Maier went out there and against the majority of the Alouettes' first team defense, went up and down the field 2 out of 3 drives for touchdowns. When the last number of years that Brown has been the starter there in the nation's capital, I can't even remember a time where the Red Blacks went in there and even competed for that period of time in Montreal since Jason Moss has been the head coach. There is all kinds of pressure. I would argue, and this is hyperbole a little bit, there's never been more pressure on a starting quarterback in a preseason game than Drew Brown, or let's say the presumed starter, because of how well Jake Maier played. It's not the same conversation because with Cohn and Jagger, we're talking about the backup position, but in Ottawa, it's arguably even more important because we're talking about the starter. Jake Maier in a new offense looked great, goes up and down the field in a place where the Red Blacks have struggled in recent years. If Drew Brown does not play well at home against Montreal in the final week of the preseason, the Red Blacks dressing room is going to have the similar kind of conversations that could be happening in Saskatchewan with Cohn and Jagger, but only about the starter. How do you guys feel, Hodge?
I mean, I think one thing that I think smartly are addressing is the team that overall looked the best in their first preseason game was the Ottawa Red Blacks. And winning preseason games does not matter. right? That's an objective fact. The results don't matter. But if there was ever a team that needed a win, right, and needed to look good right in the preseason to start winning over fans and start changing narratives, it was the Ottawa Redblacks in 2026. If there's another team that needs to do that, it's the Edmonton Elks. And I thought the Edmonton Elks looked pretty darn good too. Those are probably my two top teams from early preseason returns. So I'm glad this is coming up. Kudos to the Red Blacks. Obviously, Ryan Dinwiddie came in there trying to reset the culture. They've reset 2/3 of the roster. And I do agree that when you look at Drew Brown, Jake Mayer, they're both in pretty similar camps right now as guys who are like periphery starters. Neither is old, but also they are both very much established in their careers, right? They're kind of journeymen at this point. I mean, by definition, Jake Mayer is a journeyman. He's on his third different team in 3 years. Drew Brown, not as much, but still a guy who is yet to like fully lock himself in as a starter. I thought had a really nice 2024 season. Last year, not so much. Got banged up, didn't play brilliantly, too many turnovers. And I would almost put him in the Nick Arbuckle category of a guy who doesn't have, I mean, I think Drew Brown has a good arm. He doesn't have the biggest arm, and he's also not very mobile, right? And that is a tough thing to be as a professional quarterback. That's something that he's been trying to overcome his whole career. I think at times he's done a very nice job of that. At times he's not done necessarily a great job of that. So kudos to the Red Blacks and the Elks, frankly, for their early returns. But I do agree. This is an intense quarterback rivalry that's happening with the Red Blacks, and I'm interested to see how things play out because the Alouettes, I mean, as we'll talk about in the next segment, to me, they're still the class of the East Division, and Ottawa made them look silly.
This is a point that I brought up on social media because I do believe Drew Brown needs to be concerned because of just how good Jake Mayer looked in Ryan Dinwiddie's offense against what was essentially all of the Alouettes' starting defense. Like, that was a very strong performance. I thought it was better than Jake Mayer has looked in several years. Now, the caveat to that is this is, again, a new offense, and we have yet to see Drew Brown in it. So maybe Drew Brown comes out in that second preseason game and looks even better than Jake Mayer because Ryan Dinwiddie is a quarterback whisperer and he has just reinvigorated that Red Blacks franchise and they're going to be off and potentially challenge for a Grey Cup this year. Who knows? We have not seen it take place yet, so I am not going to write off Drew Brown just because Jake Mayer looked good in one game, but I do think it's a dynamic that needs to be paid attention to, and I also think that there are other cities where, backups performing well could threaten the starters. And I look at Edmonton, like Hodge brought up, and admittedly, it was against mostly depth players for the BC Lions, but I thought Taylor Powell looked sensational. And right now, Cody Fajardo is the bona fide franchise quarterback there, but, struggled in that inter squad scrimmage. I didn't think he looked as good against the same group of Lions backups as Powell did later in the game. I don't want to read anything into that at this stage, but he's a guy who's been on that bubble in the past, and Powell is somebody that they view as a potential quarterback of the future. How does that dynamic play out as we progress through the year with a team that very much needs to win now in both Ottawa and Edmonton because of the pressure that's on those franchises? If either of those starters slip up even slightly, I think that there could be an incentive to go quickly to the backups.
I'm not writing off Drew Brown. Let's get it straight. I'm just saying he needs to have a good preseason performance, and that's why I think there's a lot of pressure on him. And you look at the dynamic in Ottawa, I do think Ryan Dinwiddie is a quarterback whisperer. I mean, heck, he won a Grey Cup with Nick Arbuckle playing quarterback, and somehow Arbuckle was voted the MVP of that game. I'll never understand, but I digress. The situation in Ottawa breaks down like this, fellas. Jake Mayer and even the rookie Bryson Barnes, who it should be noted went 8 of 8 coming out of Utah State, I think. He looked really good. Those two players, by all accounts, were handpicked by Ryan Dinwiddie. Drew Brown was the guy that was there and is the holdover. And fellas, oftentimes we see it. Look at in Toronto. Toronto released Max Duggan, who oddly enough went to Ottawa, and Jarrett Daggy early in training camp. And it seems like when you talk to people around the league, just largely due to them not being part of the new regime. Daggy gets picked up by BC, Duggan goes to Ottawa. So the fact that Dinwiddie now has 3 quarterbacks that he's sort of handpicked there, I think will play into this equation at some point if Drew Brown does not play well. That's why I think it's imperative for Drew Brown to play well to show that 2025 was an anomaly. And I think Drew Brown specifically needs to show toughness because of what happened at the end of last season. As a quarterback, you have to be able to play through injuries. If you're hurt, that's different. But if you're injured, you need to be able to show the locker room that you can play through it. And with the type of talent that the Red Blacks have brought in the offseason, especially a bunch of players from the defending Grey Cup champion Saskatchewan Roughriders, they are going to know who the better player is very quickly starting the regular season, perhaps in the preseason. And they're going to want a guy that's in there at the quarterback position who is going to exhibit that key trait of toughness.
Before we move on, I had this thought while watching Bryson Barnes rip it up in limited action. This is a school in Utah State that has had the following quarterbacks there. Obviously, one is Barnes, but also Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers and Anthony Calvillo, the CFL's all-time leading passer. Do you know which quarterback has the single-season passing record for Utah State?
Because you're
Barnes?
asking, I'll say Barnes.
The answer is Logan Bonner, who is famous for starting the Labor Day Classic rematch a few years ago, throwing 5 interceptions, and then never getting another chance to play. Utah State's quarterback alumni is a wild Wikipedia.
So what you're saying
I told
is
you Bonner was
Barnes
good.
is either going to be really good or really bad in the Canadian Football League.
I think it's fair to say he'll end up somewhere between Logan Bonner and Anthony Calvillo. We'll put it that way.
I will say career NCAA statistics can be a bit of a hit and miss criteria because you have to be good enough to produce, but not so good that the NFL wants you early. So it tends to be a lot of guys who stuck around for extra years, perhaps because pro teams weren't interested in them yet.
3DownNation.com unveiled our first Canadian Football League power rankings entering the 2026 season last week, with the Saskatchewan Roughriders at the top and the Toronto Argonauts bringing up the rear. Do you agree with the list?
Not entirely. We had BC at 2 and Montreal at 3. That was actually the only change from when we did our rankings most recently in January, and I don't understand this change. To me, the Montreal Alouettes, yeah, they didn't make the most splashy additions this offseason, but let's call a spade a spade. This team was the best team in the CFL in 2025 when Davis Alexander was on the field. And he didn't even play at 100% last year, and I think he still went, was it 7-0 as a regular season starter, and then 8-1 as a starter if you include the playoffs, though, let's also, again, be honest, he was very much inhibited by a severe hamstring injury throughout the playoffs and some of the regular season. So to me, when you look at a guy who's still undefeated as a regular season starter and one of the CFL's best defenses, I think the Alouettes are the team to beat in the East Division, and I think they could be the number 1 team overall in the Canadian Football League. That said, I did still have the Riders number 1 on my ballot, followed by the Montreal Alouettes, and then the BC Lions at 3. I do have some concerns about the BC Lions secondary, but I still think they have too many good pieces to be bad. I think they're going to be a good football team this year. I had the Hamilton Tiger Cats at 4, and I don't think I would change really anything else. It feels bad to, after a huge off-season change whirlwind, to have the Ottawa Red Blacks still at 8, but Like, this is a team that's missed the playoffs 5 of the last 6 years, and they've done this before where they bring in a new head coach and they redo a bunch of the roster, and they have fallen on their faces again. So I think our voters, and I would count myself in this, when it comes to certainly the Red Blacks and the Elks, a team that, again, I think got way better on paper this offseason, there's just a little bit of wait and see, right? Like, how do you put Edmonton and Ottawa over reigning playoff teams like Calgary and Winnipeg, for instance? Like, it's tough to do. There's a lot to like about the incumbent playoff teams. Like, I don't think any of us would sit here and look at one of last year's 6 playoff teams and be like, oh, what was this club doing? They got way worse this offseason. At least speaking for myself, I would not make that case about anybody. So I would have changed that one part I at Montreal 2, BC 3. But other than that, I think these rankings make a lot of sense. And I'm looking forward to how they'll inevitably change over the coming weeks and months.
I agree with you, Hodge. I think that would be a small tweak as well. But the one playoff team that I am looking at and saying, are these guys too high right now, is the Calgary Stampeders at number 5. And I think you can justify that placement based on what they did last season. But I look at some of the departures. Obviously, Jalen Hutchings, he's technically a free agent right now, so he could walk through the door tomorrow if they really wanted, but still seems to be pursuing those NFL opportunities. But also Jacob Roberts, and the fact that Folarin Orimolade is not going to be ready to start the regular season. Reggie Begelton also hurt right now. I just don't know that the Calgary Stampeders got better this offseason, and they struggled a little bit at the end of last year after that tremendously hot start. I wonder if they're not a team that can regress a little bit in 2026. And when you look at the teams behind them, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, yes, I do still have questions about Zach Collaros and Tommy Condell. Is he going to really be the magic fix that they expect him to be? But you can't question the fact that they added talent, because you've got guys like Tim White and Jake Serezna and Jarrell Broxton coming into that organization. I think that will inherently make them better. So I would place them above the Calgary Stampeders. And then, as you talked about, either Edmonton or Ottawa or both could be much improved this year. We just don't know, and you hesitate to do it because of what they've produced in the past. And in the case of Ottawa, some of the questions at the quarterback position. But I would not be shocked if the Stampeders fall a few spots over the next couple weeks in the power rankings, because I have some questions about their departures, and I wasn't particularly convinced by their replacements.
I've already said on this podcast I suck at rankings, but the BC Lions, to me, entering the 2026 Canadian Football League season, are the number 1 team. Nathan Rourke, yes, has to stay healthy. You could say that about a number of other teams in terms of their starting quarterback situation, but the fact that they went out and got Casey Sales essentially handed to them on a platter by the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Great article, by the way, JC. For those who have not read it, go to the site and search Casey Sales Unprofessional. It will pop up, or go to JC's author drop-down page. Casey Sales, Darnell Sankey in the middle. I think the secondary perhaps has some question marks, but CJ Colden got snapped up by them. There's some people that really like him in the league as a potential longer-term starter. He still needs to prove that. But when I look at that offense, like, are we forgetting that the BC Lions set a Canadian Football League record for yards per play? Like, that's unbelievable. And this group now goes into the second year of Buck Pierce's offense. Like, it's not going to be new to them. And Nathan Rourke has all the same playmakers around him. It was key to him, for example, to keep James Butler, and along with, a bunch of the other guys, Keon Hatcher, Justin McInnes, and the rest. So how are we not talking about BC being the number 1 team in the Canadian Football League? And no, I'm not just saying this because Nathan Rourke is a Canadian quarterback. Nathan Rourke is the best quarterback in the Canadian Football League. He is dangerous with his arm. He is dangerous with his mind. He is dangerous with his legs. And he has essentially the same cast around him, minus, admittedly, because I know Hodge will mention this, and JC would want to too, Jarrell Broxton, the big fella. But I think that they can fill that spot in. They've upgraded on defense. And I thought there were multiple times in the West Final where the Lions should have closed it out. JC, you wrote so well about that I think we are underrating BC, who arguably should have been in that Grey Cup in Winnipeg and could have had a chance to win it. Now, that's what the Saskatchewan Roughriders did. They won that West Final on the field and went out and beat Montreal. I'm not handing that championship to BC and taking it away from Saskatchewan. But to me, far and away, BC is the number one team because to Hodge, they have the number one player in the Canadian Football League in Nathan.
Well, I will say this, though, to your point and to JC's point about the Stampeders, part of what I remember about the BC Lions is coming out flat in the West Semi and getting outplayed offensively and defensively and only losing that game due in part to one of the worst performances by any special teams group in the history of the Canadian Football League, which was the Calgary Stampeders in that game. I thought offensively, the Stampeders were the better team. Defensively, the Stampeders were the better team. The BC Lions came out flat. I thought we're lucky to win that West Semi. That said, I did think that, yeah, it was a 50-50 game. That West Final could have gone either way. And had the Lions made it to the Grey Cup, they obviously very well could have won it. I actually recall seeing the Lions beat the Alouettes in the Grey Cup in Winnipeg in 2006. It would have been funny to see the same thing happen again 19 years later, albeit at a different stadium. But I think that the Stampeders, like, look, I had the same thoughts as you, JC. Jalen Hutchings was one of the best 5 players in the CFL last year, unbelievably disruptive along the interior. But every time I thought about him and Jacob Roberts being gone, I remembered, okay, well, but without Flarner Malade and Reggie Bagleton, like, this Stampeders team went into BC Place and again outplayed the Lions in the playoffs. And so I'm not higher on the Stampeders than I was a season ago, but I'm not necessarily down on them. They could also get one or both of those guys back over the course of this season. So when you take their roster and you add in Dejon Brissett, you add in Tyreek McAllister as I think a really intriguing returner, I do think they got better in some places. So I'm not lower on the Stampeders again than I was in 25. I'm just not higher than them.
Let me ruin this conversation by bringing up reality, because ultimately what's going to determine how these teams stack up by the end of the year, yes, it's going to be talent on the field and on the roster, but it's going to be injuries, right? And I think you look at a number of teams, whether it's the Calgary Stampeders, whether it's, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, whether it's the BC Lions or the Saskatchewan Roughriders, as much as we've praised Braden Shager, and if they get an injury at their starting quarterback position for any length of time, it's going to dramatically change their outlook for the entire year. So as much as we want to prognosticate with the talent that's been built on paper, it's how much of that talent can stay healthy that's ultimately going to determine where these teams rank at the end. And we've seen a lot of very good football teams at the start of the year not play very well at the end because they just don't have the horses left in the stable.
Or poor football teams play well and surprise us, like the Alouettes in 2023, who were 9th in our power rankings, at least, and probably a lot of other pieces. This season is essentially, I hate saying war of attrition, but it's about attrition and how well you can manage that. And usually the healthiest teams, for the most part, are there at the end. That was the case with the Saskatchewan Roughriders last year. And I should probably add to that, the healthiest and deepest teams. But to me, it just smacks me in the face. Like, the BC Lions have the best player in the Canadian Football League. 2nd year in the offense with Buck Pierce. All of his key playmakers back. Yes, Broxton is gone. But how are they not the consensus number 1 team? What was that?
Aiden Eberhardt is not there anymore, who was a component of that offense, just for the record. And they will be going with what seems to be either Kieran Poissant or Hergy Mayala at that spot as a Canadian, which, even if you're super high on those guys, and I believe they both have advantages and disadvantages, that's probably a step down in terms of production from a guy who, I believe was second in the CFL last year in terms of yards per catch, was able to be a deep threat for that offense. You're going to see that dynamic change a little bit. So I don't know that makes the offense dramatically worse, but it's not the exact same cast of characters.
And I'll highlight really quickly. I remember speaking at Argos practice last year with team staffer Mike Hogan, and he was talking about the 2024 Grey Cup. And I believe he said, if I remember correctly, the team had 2 injuries on the entire roster when they were at the Grey Cup. And they were both like breaks, like they weren't little soft tissue things. And when I bring up my notes from the Argonauts last year, these are some of the players they had on their injured list come the end of the year. Franchise quarterback Chad Kelly, projected first-string running back Mayan Williams, star receiver DeMonte Coxey, perennial, all-East Division guy Devaris Daniels, Canadian ratio-breaking offensive tackle Anim Dankwa, unproven, but started games as a Canadian at tackle. Dylan Giffen and Sage Doxtator, both guys who've started games in the CFL at offensive line. First-round pick Jeremiah Ojo, breakout pass rusher Andrew Chatfield, Anthony Lanier, who's been an all-CFL defensive tackle, Wynton McManus, who was an all-CFL linebacker, and Nick Arbuckle wasn't even healthy to finish the season. So, when you talk about attrition, yes, this is a huge factor for any season. This is just one glimpse at a team that won a championship in 2024 as a club that was almost unprecedentedly healthy, essentially no injuries. And then in 2025, couldn't get anybody to stay on the field all year. And a lot of this is just luck-based. This team had more than 20 injured players at the end of 2025, virtually 0 at the end of 2024. So it just comes down to how the cookie crumbles in a lot of cases.
It's now time for JC's random neg lister. And with all the departures at the quarterback position in Winnipeg, I went searching for what options they might have if they did indeed want to bring in another quarterback into the equation. And the most intriguing name that I came across was Caleb Blaha from Wisconsin River Falls. This guy was the Gagliardi Trophy winner as the top player in Division III football last year. That's their version of the Heisman, and led River Falls to a Division III national championship while breaking Joe Burrow's single-season NCAA yardage record with 6,189 total yards. Yes, it's at a low level of competition, but you can't ignore numbers like that. For his career, he was 65% on completions, over 11,000 passing yards, 92 passing touchdowns, and 27 interceptions. But he was also a dynamic rushing threat at that level with over 3,700 rushing yards and 60 TDs on the ground. I think this is a guy who is intriguing for his skill set as a quarterback, can be mobile, makes some nice throws as well. Looked like a man amongst boys at a low level of competition. But if you don't think he's a QB by the end of your evaluation, maybe he's a receiver as well, because at the start of his career, he played wide receiver at Winona State and then recently transitioned back to receiver at the New Orleans Saints rookie minicamp. You've got multiple positional options here for Blaha, who is one of the most productive players in NCAA football history.
If Caleb Blaha ever becomes a star player in Winnipeg, allow me to be the first to dub them the Winnipeg Blue Blahammers.
God, that's bad.
Had to be said. It's now time for Hodge's Heritage Moment. On this day in 2009, Andrew Green announced his retirement from the CFL. The Indiana product became one of the highest selected Canadian players in NFL draft history when the Miami Dolphins took him in the second round in 1995. After 4 seasons down south, Green spent the majority of his career in the CFL, dressing for 141 games and winning the league's most outstanding offensive lineman award, in 2003 with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Dunk, I don't think JC remembers Andrew Green playing, so I'll ask you, do you have any Andrew Green specific memories?
I've met him in person before and interviewed him on the Rider radio broadcast network. He's a towering man, lots of energy, still has a passion for football. And I remember him, dude. He was an absolute road grader. I believe he played on an offensive line there in Saskatchewan beside Gene Mikowski, or at least on that offensive line that was with him. He was a beast.
Just how good is it that a guy named Green was dominant for the Saskatchewan Roughriders? I just love when names fit the billing.
Like Blahammers.
All right, enough joking around, you jokesters. Let's talk about a Canadian quarterback. Yes, the segment that intermittently appears in the 3DownNation podcast is back. You don't know if it'll be here next week, but for this week, it's here because we got to talk about Arnaud Desjardins. 7 of 8 for 71 yards in his first CFL preseason action. And as our guy, Jean-Auge, astutely pointed out, this cat could have been signed by anybody following the 2025 CFL draft as a non-counter and been in a training camp last year and could have even been in a training camp on time this year. What does he do? Goes out on short notice. I believe he was signed on Monday, and then on Friday turns this performance around. It bears repeating again. 7 of 8 for 71 yards, led a touchdown drive for the Montreal Alouettes. Dare I say, he looked like the best Alouettes quarterback on the field, all due respect. Davis Alexander's the franchise guy. He got nicked up in that game. It's good that he's likely going to be healthy for week 1, but Desjardins was the best quarterback on that field for the Alouettes. And I just hope that this Canadian bias, what have you, continues to get exposed here, because Arnaud Desjardins has looked better than a bunch of American quarterbacks who have gotten opportunities in the past years in the Canadian Football League already. And he literally had less than 5 practice days to do it. I mean, really only 3, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, because Thursday's a walkthrough and then you're playing the game. So 3 practice days, and this is what he does. Alarm, I should say. Canadian quarterbacks who played the 3-down game for the majority of their life can play professional Canadian football. All right, that goes for all the personnel men, the offensive coordinators, the head coaches out there, especially the ones who are American. These kids can ball, and I believe if they earn it and they get that opportunity, can show it in the Canadian Football League. I'm not saying give these kids an opportunity just because they're Canadian, but Arnaud Desjardins, a 2-time Vanier Cup winner at Laval, was in the conversation multiple times for a Heck Crichton Award. This is a kid that one season at Laval, I believe if the numbers are right, in the regular season, threw 18 touchdowns and only 1 pick. But no, he's not good enough to get a contract until into the second training camp after he goes unselected somehow. I still don't understand how he went unselected in the 2025 Canadian draft.
I thought
you guys
Desjardins
got nothing to add about Desjardins?
I thought he was the best quarterback for the Owls on that day. Now, admittedly, Montreal looked like absolute dog water in that preseason outing. I did not think that team looked ready and prepared for that game, but Desjardins certainly did. It's not like he necessarily lit the world on fire. There was some mistakes. There was some not so good moments, but there was also some impressive throws. And I was especially impressed considering the circumstances. I always thought that Desjardins was the better of the 2 quarterbacks between him and Jonathan Senecal, who they drafted last year. I thought Desjardins should have been that pick. This reinforced my belief in that because I thought he looked dramatically better than the limited action that Senecal saw last year. I just wish he had a full year of development at the CFL level under his belt so we could see him truly shine. Hopefully he gets a bigger opportunity.
Let's go to the 3-minute drill. Montreal Alouettes quarterback Davis Alexander was taken for precautionary x-rays on his knee after an awkward hit in the team's first preseason game. It does seem like he's going to be good to go for week 1, though, but is there cause for concern?
I get a little bit of concern from Owls fans if you're like, oh, here we go again. But It should be noted, Davis Alexander at Portland State missed 0 games due to injury in his college career. He is not an injury-plagued player. He's just had some bad luck. Hopefully, he's good to go. BC Lions first-round draft pick Nate Demontiak made a spectacular catch, arguably the play of the preseason so far, in his preseason debut, but left the stadium with his arm in a sling. How worried should fans be?
Well, the Lions haven't updated us on Demontignac's injury at this stage, but I'm not overly concerned. Buck Pierce seemed rather chipper about it post-game. Demontignac had a smile on his face as well, despite the sling. I think in some ways this might actually work in the Lions' favor, because with the roster building that they have to do at Canadian receiver, somebody was going to have to go on the 1-game injured list. Now you have an actual reason to put Demontignac on there, and he already proved that he can play at that level, at this level, because that catch was unbelievable. Two-time CFL All-Star Marc-Antoine Dequoy has been named one of 16 finalists to make Team Canada's men's flag football team for the IFAF World Championships. Can he help the team qualify for the Olympics?
Well, hell yeah, he can. Dequoy's going to be out there making plays, I bet. I mean, we know how good he can be as a DB and how much ground he can cover, but I think this guy in a flag football situation could be a great receiving threat. Let's see if Paul LaPolice puts him in on offense. Former Blue Bombers executive Rianne Marcoux has been hired as the president of the Winnipeg Sea Bears in the Canadian Elite Basketball League. Is that a fit for her and the team?
Yeah, I think Rayanne's sharp. And the Sea Bears, I will say, are a big deal in Winnipeg. Like, I looked up the attendance numbers the other day. The Sea Bears, 7,700 average attendance in 2025, which was actually down from the previous year. But the second place attendance was the Vancouver Bandits at 4,400. Like the Winnipeg Sea Bears, almost double the next most at the Canada Life Center. It's a hot ticket and good for them picking up Marcoux, who I think could help them go to even greater heights. Offensive lineman Josh Donovan told you, JC, that he was not given an explanation for his release by the Toronto Argonauts, despite working with the starters through the first few days of training camp. Is that surprising?
It is a little bit surprising that he wasn't given a legitimate reason, but it's not necessarily surprising that he got cut. I thought Donovan struggled a little bit in his preseason debut for the BC Lions. I'm not writing him off yet. It was early days and he's still learning the offense. But I think it's an important lesson for fans of all franchises that those day one of camp starters, they don't mean much at all. And sometimes it's just an opportunity to assess a guy that you know you are already leaning towards releasing. Running back Larry Rountree III made a splash in his preseason debut for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, rushing 9 times for 86 yards and a touchdown. Is he a shoo-in for the Tabbies' open job?
I don't think he's a shoo-in yet, because you never know with Scott Milanovic day in and day out how he's feeling. Can be a hot-tempered guy. And I say that with all due respect. He's just passionate about football. But the fact that the Tiger Cats released American running back Shane Watts on Monday, who had been with the team for about 6 weeks last year, leads me to believe that it is now Rountree III's job to lose. He looked really great running the football in the rain, but most importantly for Milanovic, you have to be able to protect the passer. And Rountree III, who has dropped 30 pounds entering training camp with the Ticats, has shown to be consistent at that through training camp. He'll need to keep it up in the last preseason game to secure the job. Justin Rankin, the star Edmonton running back, wants to become the first CFL player ever to record 1,000 yards rushing and 1,000 yards receiving in a single Canadian Football League season. Do you think he could make it happen in 2026?
Look, I don't think this is something that's likely to happen, but I also don't think it's impossible. Rankin is a great receiver out of the backfield. He is a fantastic safety release valve for Cody Fajardo. And like going for 1,000 is kind of nuts. No one's ever done it. The closest was Andrew Harris, who was over 1,000 rushing and I think had 800 and change with the Blue Bombers receiving in 2020 or 2017. If it is possible, Rankin's probably the guy to do it. Former first-round draft pick Enoch McConzo has retired despite being a projected starter on the Toronto Argonauts. How will you remember him?
I will choose to remember him for his collegiate career at Coastal Carolina, where he was a tremendous playmaker in some great seasons for the Chanticleers. Unfortunately, as a professional, after going in the first round, he really disappointed. And I was a guy who was very high on him coming out of the draft. It never happened for whatever reason. I'm sad to see him retire at this stage without a ton of professional success, but we'll always have those days in Myrtle Beach. The Saskatchewan Roughriders released Darius Washington, who started 4 games along the offensive line in 2025. Was that a surprise?
It wasn't necessarily a surprise, just looking at the fact that I think the team, like some of these other offensive linemen, Americans, I should say, at that position. And it seems like they were able to jump him in the depth chart. I hesitate to put out names because it can change with surprise training camp cuts. But Spencer Brown is a guy that's been talked about a lot, and same with Jalen Williams as well in Saskatchewan as being, a depth American behind some of the guys that they have starting up front. Peyton Collins at left tackle, Jacob Brammer at right guard, and Jamarcus Hardrick at right tackle. Isaiah Wooden Sr. has re-signed with the Hamilton Tiger Cats after a brief stint, really just the offseason, with the Cleveland Browns. Tabby's also cut veteran return man Mario Alford in a corresponding move. Is that a legitimate switch?
I thought Alford looked good last year, and I thought he looked good in the preseason for the Ticats. That said, if you get a chance to get younger at that position, there's arguably nobody better returning the football right now in the Canadian Football League than Isaiah Wooden Sr. So it does make sense to me. Hopefully we'll see Alford get picked up somewhere. It might take an injury, but returners rarely last a full season. It's such an unbelievably punishing position. So I do expect we'll see him back at some point, and good luck to Wooden Sr. as he returns to the Ticats, a guy who I think was starting to become a star in that market, and it's nice to see him back.
Let's just hang on that point for a minute, because this may be one of the cruelest cuts, unintentionally, I might add, I've ever seen. Because poor Mario Alford, at 34 years old, went out there in that preseason game, ran back a kick for no reason that got called back in penalty in a game that did not matter, gassed himself at 34 years old again, and then got cut for his troubles. I feel for Mario Alford in that circumstance, it should be illegal to make players that old run that far and then cut them afterwards.
For Justin Dunk and JC Abbott, I'm John Hodge. We thank you as always for listening to the 3DownNation podcast. We are pivoting back to early week releases, hopefully Mondays, we'll see, with the season coming up. So be sure to subscribe to our newsletter, the YouTube channel, the podcast feed, all that good stuff for all the latest news, insight, analysis on the Canadian Football League and more. 3downnation.com. Hit it. We'll see you next time.